Welcome to Robot Wrestling, learning design in the age of I mean, I, uh, mean AI. I am totally beside myself with delight that we've been able to get the panel that we have on board because they are people who've been able to say some really substantial things about AI and just as is obligatory, we could, to set the scene, look at various graphs. Here, AI papers is, over the last 20 some years increased ninefold. There's a similar curve for AI startups or VC investment in AI startups, and a similar curve for AI startups themselves. But I think it might just be as helpful to tell you honestly how I feel, which is tired and confused. And I read about some enthusiastic things where I feel on one hand excited, but then on the other hand, I feel like I'm a mark watching himself caught in the net of someone else's grift. And then again, I can feel it even worse, like real fear and concern that we're all marching into dystopia of bias, information garbage, inequality, environmental degradation, surveillance. And I have to thank my friend Charlotte Schuler, who's kept me abreast of all this, and probably the one of the smartest, if not the smartest, learning designers that I know. I hope that we can do justice to some of your concerns. And then on the other hand, I feel like I'm afraid that if I don't engage with these tools, that I'll miss out, become a dinosaur, lose my job. Um, and really, I feel all of these things simultaneously. And then lastly, I feel, I'm kind of not sure if I should say this or not, to be honest, but despite, reading and watching and studying all these free courses, in the end, I feel like I did when I was young and I lived in Oregon and I didn't have much money. And on my lunch breaks, I'd buy processed, or bleached rice. And I'd feel satiated for maybe 15 minutes. And then after that, just as kind of hungry as when I started. So, with the hope of, I guess, a more substantial diet, if you can do my best segue here, let me introduce our panelists. Um, Shelley Minocha is a professor emerita of learning technologies and social computing at the Open University, a leading researcher in effective learning platform design, and she's written some widely shared critical pieces on AI. Efrat First is a lecturer and head of digital pedagogy and research at the Moffitt Institute. She's a cognitive neuroscientist whose work and research translates cognitive science into learning practice. Her work has pioneered AI integration for teacher training programs. Neil Mosley draws from years advising institutions on learning design. He's written about the potential threats and opportunities AI presents for learning design. Margaret Korsich recently said his articles are what everybody's talking about, or something to that effect. It was very good. Egla Venauskaite is a learning strategist and director of Nodes, an award-winning learning design consultant, and she's written and spoken about AI extensively, having notably co-authored AI in L&D, The State of Play. And last but certainly not least, Kane Murdoch, head of complaints appeals in misconduct at Macquarie University, is a world-leading expert on student misconduct, and he's spoken and written about the unique problems AI poses for academic integrity. How do I stop sharing? All right, let's see. Escape. Stop share. Now let's jump into our first question. Um, we'll start positive. Uh, what are the great promises that AI offers for teaching online? And Neil, if you could lead on that question.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone's well today, and I hope the sun is shining wherever you are, because it is in Wales, which it rarely does. So hopefully it is where you are. Yeah, promises. I mean, I think there are lots of promises, but it's incumbent on us to kind of take advantage of those, I think. And so, I mean, I think about it in different dimensions. I think, a really key aspect of online education is communication. And that could be written, that could be visual, that could be audio visual. And I think there is potential for AI to improve those kinds of things. I mean, to a certain extent, some of the things that we already know around online education, about how we might write for the web, how we might utilize words and images together, all of those kind of things are known and not always acted upon. So there's a tension between AI may be able to kind of um, help people adapt those things more rapidly. And you think of things like, to give an example, think of something like Canva. My wife is a graphic designer, and so she's seen all manner of kind of crimes in the world of graphic design. But you've got something like Canva that enables someone to put something together that maybe adheres to some good design principles. And I don't think it's exactly like Canva, but that's an example of maybe what's kind of wrapped up in what I'm saying here. Maybe some of the AI aspects, some of the AI technologies that are embedded in the way that we go about content and ultimately what we communicate, that might, if that's imbued with some good principles, that might help the way in which we communicate in online learning and online teaching. And I think there's so many different aspects. There's a way in which AI tools can make content and learning experiences more accessible. I mean, that's a big problem. It's still, the ownership is on the individual in order to do that in terms of online programs. But if tools can help make those more can make accessibility something that can be more easily addressed by individual instructors in courses, then that can serve a really great purpose. And then I think just to kind of wrap it up, I think there's that whole area of what I'd call kind of responsive teaching. So how can AI be utilized to support, feedback for students' responses and interactions in a way that's more rapid and than might be possible via an instructor on an online course? How can it, adjust different tasks and adjust to different levels based on kind of student responses? And that's just in relation to the technology that maybe an institution provides. Then there's a whole area of, actually, if you're a student, you've got all of these tools that you might draw upon to help you. So there are myriad ways in my mind that I can think of, ways that AI technology can improve things, but it's not going to do it on its own. It has to be informed by you know good and sound research or best bets on what we think is going to benefit learning and learning experiences. I'll shut up there.
Um, thank you, Neil. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have an opinion. So the way I see it is that content has been used as a proxy for skill development for the longest time. Organizations, and I work in workplace learning, they are overloaded with content. And for example, if you need to teach something like feedback, how to interview someone, as a hiring manager, how to coach someone, how to negotiate, all of these skills, usually in the digital environment, the go-to solution would have been, and still is, largely a branching scenario, which is understandable because we have always had this tech limitation. We cannot go beyond that. We just didn't have the technology. So the reality is that content, the way we have used it so far in learning design, it was neither good skill development nor good performance support. And when we think about what AI gives us, I like to think about it in across these two dimensions, because on one hand, it can give us a real skill development sandbox where I can speak in my own language, in my own style of speaking, and get personalized feedback on how I did and do it over and over again and kickstart the deliberate practice cycle, which is game changing for skill development, which is something we've never been able to scale. And then we have, on the other hand, performance support, which is me asking questions and getting contextualized answers to help me perform in my job, which is the holy grail in workplace learning. So if we think from that perspective, we essentially have more precise tools in our arsenal in AI. We can do exactly what we want to do rather than try to do the best we can with content, trying to sort of stretch it beyond what it can actually do. We can also create learning experiences and learning designs that are more personalized and more contextual and therefore more relevant for our learners. And finally, in this, at the sort of larger level, when we think about online learning and people that need to be, that are learning fully online, that need to be self-directed, we can, with AI, potentially create helpers in tutors and AI assistants that can help them overcome blockers or help motivate them if they lose touch with their goal and sort of the larger purpose. So like a little friend. So I think yeah, there is it can be quite disruptive in a good way, but as Neil says, it's very much about what we do with it.
Brilliant, thank you. Now let's get negative, let's get critical and ask what do we think are the risks that AI presents, specifically with, I mean, generally, but specifically with the view to teaching online. Shelley, if you could start.
Thank you, Leonard. I think I'll outline three main risks that AI presents for teaching online. I think for both educators and students, what will happen, what I fear is that there will be an over-dependency on AI tools, possibly resulting in laziness, possibly be becoming more complacent, that we are not checking what the AI tools are giving us. And we might lose the quest for learning by discovering. We might lose the skills to search, to analyze, to filter the content based on our task. So I'll take the example of summarizing. So we have AI tools now which can summarize a report or a paper. So without having to read the paper, I get the gist of what that paper is. But if you're not reading, then you're not thinking. And if you're not thinking, then you're not really learning or retaining what you are reading. And when we read a paper, by cross-referencing, we discover new research groups. We discover new people that we hadn't known before, new papers that we hadn't known before. So we will lose those opportunities of that serendipitous discovery of people and content if we just resort to summaries in this example. The second point is, Leonard, on the effect on learning in general. So we'll be learning and the knowledge generation will be from synthetic text, which has been consolidated without any individual viewpoints and perspectives. So when educators teach, they bring their own life experiences, they bring their academic experiences, they provide us with various perspectives. Similarly, when we interact with our fellow students, to every problem or concept, they bring different perspectives. We will lose all these connections with educators and peers, and because we are not learning with them. And I think this dehumanization of education brings me to the third point, which is the effect on mental and physical health. Once we start losing connections with others, and the process of learning is AI mediated rather than being a process of learning with others or from others, I feel that would affect our well-being. And the encouragement that we get from AI-based systems will be rather superficial, rather than being meaningful or confidence boosting, which human interactions are. So we may anthropomorphize AI as being an assistant, as being a tutor, being a friend, being a staff member. but I still feel it's a non-human entity. I won't even call it a being, it's a non-human entity, and it is synthetic. So it will not bring that human-to-human connectivity that we so much need for our learning and for our physical and mental well-being.
That's amazing. Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I'll have a bash, Lennon. Just to preface, I work for a university. I work in large part to do with handling misconduct, and so I do see it through the lens. Egil, that's all of your stuff is really brand new, and so I love seeing some of the positives to AI. I must say, not just the negatives. But the way that I see it in my own context is that teaching is really, really wrapped up in assessment, and you can't just divorce teaching from assessment. And so the risks are, in some ways, pretty severe. Like, everyone's in the world of kind of higher education and universities, their response to ChatGPT was cataclysmic. Oh no, this has ruined us. We can't do anything that we used to do. We've got to try to catch all the students. And I very quickly formed the view that that is an impossibility. The real change that ChatGPT brought forward was the removal of plausible deniability, that what we're doing was actually sustainable. Contract cheating is and remains rife. AI use, or illegitimate AI use as it's kind of framed, is simply just another stack on the pile. So the way that I look at it is that AI presents opportunities if we only wish to grasp them. And some are more easily grasped than others. Like, turning around universities is like turning around big ships. You need a lot of power, and you need a lot of people behind the wheel, so to speak. But once you start accepting the view that we won't kind of misconduct our way out of this problem, you start looking for better solutions. And some of that, like using AI's efficiency gains where it's appropriate. So, for example, someone kind of touched on it, where getting really quick feedback to students on stuff that is really, first year maths problems or something. That doesn't necessarily need a human. Humans, we can choose where we put them into these processes and not waste their energies repeating the same thing all the time. And so I think if we start looking for opportunities, we'll also start seeing other ways to use AI. But yeah, in terms of risks, I think it's a risk to use detectors, for example. I think it's a major risk. It threatens. It doesn't really cover our loins with the loincloth, so to speak. It doesn't cover us. But what it does is put students through a kind of churner, but also puts staff through a churner, because you're also expecting staff to deal with all these cases in a completely, all at sea fashion. They don't know how to prove it. They don't necessarily know any of the basics around this stuff. And then all of a sudden it's just exploded everywhere. So it's not even like we can point to a naughty minority of students. Like, there's a reasonable chance that a lot of students are using this for a lot of different purposes, and some of them are legitimate, and we just can't manage that.
Yeah, Neil, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add two things to those responses. I think two potential dangers are like the efficiencies. So I think when we, particularly in online education, where sometimes we borrow technologies from the business world, sometimes the efficiencies that people are seeking through technologies in the business world aren't necessarily conducive to learning. And actually, in a way, we kind of want to slow that process down or speed it up sometimes.
Where it's appropriate. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is that the thing that I hear so much is personalization, and personalization's always been the kind of promise of education. How can you teach for that individual just perfectly for their needs? And there's a lot in that, but I think we have to also be careful of the fact that we do tend to live in a fairly Western individualistic society, and personalization can be a bit of a proxy for individualization, which might be challenging from a learning point of view. So we kind of have to also be aware of what influences are being brought in that might not be useful for learning, I think. And those are two, I think, in my mind.
I don't want us to, I want to make sure we get to all the questions, but might be worth adding that Swati Agarwal adds that much, I think, Kane, you would not disagree that that AI, and I quote, does not add up to the existing, they don't check quote, that AI does not add up to the existing inequalities in access to education resources. And so some of these tools are that have unequal, unfair results. Just 2 points to add to what you said, Shelley. There's and sorry, this is your panel, not mine, but there was a literary critic, I think from the late 90s, early aughties, named Robert Fowler, who's Austrian, who had this theory, that kind of media theory, where a lot of people, I think, around him were talking about interactivity, and he had a theory which he called interpassivity, where you look at the one of his examples was academics and copying machines, and so we put the book on the copying machine, and then we let it make a copy for us, and then we feel like we've done something. We've deferred the enjoyment. He uses Lacanian Freudian language. We've deferred enjoyment to the copy machine, or a canned laughter. We feel like we had a good time because the TV laughed for us, and in a way, it's so dangerous, as you were saying, where you let an AI summarize a text for you, and you get this, an output that's very similar to if you'd done it, and there's this risk that you feel like you've done something, when in fact you've done really very little. I think also, just to add to your point, Kane, about that you can't separate assessment from learning, because I think in much of the text that I've read, that seems to be the solution that people are pointing towards, is sort of what if we just took assessment out of it, but so in a way, people are, I guess, experiencing this problem. Moving on to the next question, we'll just put it right out there. Does AI change pedagogy? Some people are suggesting it does. Does learning itself change? Efrat, it'd be great if you could lead on that question. Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry. So yes, I think that actually you mentioned the challenges and the opportunities and the risks, and I'm thinking that maybe the underlying question is whether this revolution, if you want to call it this way, is transformational for learning. Does learning actually change? And I kind of have the feeling that you all agree to the answer that I wanted to give from a cognitive perspective. The answer is no. Of course, our biological brain does not change, and it's still dependent on acquiring knowledge and meaning making and practice, and it's really essential for long-term performance and stability. So we are still dependent on these factors, and as a result, the very basic principles of good pedagogy, they don't change. They also stay the same. I like to think about it in education specifically. So human learning is both the limiting factor and our goal. And this is still valid, right? We still have to teach humans, and we still have to teach them in a pace that they can learn. You mentioned before the difference between those experts who use it and those who still have to go through the pathway. So again, it's the same in this under these conditions of human learning being the limiting factor and the goal. then this is the same equation, it's the same parameters, it's the same assumptions, and those principles still apply. But of course, things do shift and change with all this generative AI thing. And you mentioned the opportunity to actually, I call it bypass learning by using AI. On one hand, and then on the other, all these opportunities to maybe achieve more if you use it right, if you use it responsibly. So taken together, I think that regarding pedagogy, it means that the same things apply, but we have to do them better, more rigorously, because if there are greater risks to the process that we're talking about, like cheating on one hand and then other opportunities on the other, then my conclusion, at least, is that we have to do the same things, but much, much better. We have to take more responsibility to build or construct a better pathway of learning. So this is how, of course, there are a lot of ways that we should be creative about it. And there are new things that we have to do, for example, rethink assessment and assignments and how we scaffold things. But the basic ideas, for me, I just keep realizing how those basic ideas that we talk about all the time, they get if you wish, a new shine. They are validated. We need them more. So this is my approach to learning on one side, and then pedagogy, which is the other side of the coin.
That's brilliant. Anyone have anything to add to that? Very solid response.
Yeah, it was a very solid response. And for me, the way I think about it is that, yeah, it's a hard note. Learning, AI does not change how people learn, but it is up to us to make sure that we use AI in a way that supports learning. I really like the Efrat's the way she expresses it, bypassing learning by using AI versus achieving more if we're using it correctly.
Right.
And I think what that means for us and in our profession is that we need to know not just how to use generative AI and what it is, we need to know how it works and how it works best in the context of learning specifically. So it's AI plus learning as a skill. And just like every piece of technology that came before AI, I think it's important not to fall into the trap of thinking that AI itself is going to solve learning. In this regard, it's a tool that we can either use for something useful or waste its potential.
I think.
Sorry, go on.
I just think that there is a very solid point there of us learning how to use AI before we use it for teaching. And this is something that I see a lot, that people are not using it so much. They didn't try it like very deeply, not just here and there a few moments, but very deeply on something, on a content that I know a lot about or I teach. And then we ask a lot of big questions, but the answers are in the practice. It's not surprising because this is how we work, but we actually have to try it really, really deeply before we understand what it means for using it for education. So this point, I think, was worth even another highlight. Yeah.
I think that's if no one has anything else to add, I think that makes for a really nice segue into our next question, which is about how are you using AI in your work and your teaching practice now, and how do you see, in general, how others are using it? And Egla, who I know has done quite a lot of research in this area, if you could lead on that question, that'd be great.
Yeah, so for context, myself and my collaborator, Donald Taylor, we both work in workplace learning, and we did have about half a year ago, we carried out a survey, a research piece among workplace L&D professionals, asking what they use AI for. We had both freelance learning designers, internal ones, managers, specialists, leaders, the entire collection of people from all parts of this world, including higher education as well. So when we looked at the results, the way I found it useful to think about it is that if you think about learning design as a four-part process, we have discovery, design, delivery, and follow-up, which follow-up, evaluation, iteration, whatever you want to call it. So if you think about a curve of how AI is being used, so at the high level, we have a very low use in the discovery phase. We have an uptick, a noticeable uptick in learning design. We have the majority of uses in delivery, meaning content creation, and then we have just a complete tumbleweed in follow-up. And specifically what that means is that in discovery, the few use cases that we have seen that are what I call common practices is the main one is learning topic research, meaning that I'm as a designer, I need to create some piece of learning around a topic. I'm using AI to get myself some foundational knowledge to understand what I'm talking about and what questions to ask potentially to my subject matter experts and so on. So that's discovery. When we'll go into a learning design, specifically, there are 3 use cases that have become quite common. So the first one is learning designers are using AI to create a high-level design outline, so for the learning experience. The second one is they're using AI to create learning activities. For example, okay, so what kind of project can I offer people here? What kind of case study, perhaps a scenario that they can work through? So that sort of thing. So it's about more discrete learning activities. And the final one is creating quiz questions to check their knowledge. And I have opinions about the quality of AI generated quiz questions, but that's for another time. And finally, when we go into delivery, which is the majority of people using AI here, so obviously there is content, and we have obviously text creation, text generation, we have image generation, but quite interestingly, synthetic video and audio. I was quite surprised that the use of it is not a niche use case anymore. Synthetic video and audio, as well as scenario scripting. So for example, if I want to create my own custom video, for example. And finally, translation is a huge thing. AI is being widely used, especially outside the English-speaking countries, to translate content. So this is where we are. Oh, and the final one, the follow-up, nothing's happening there. No one's measuring. Almost no one is using AI to understand how people have gone through the experience. Some people are using it for sentiment analysis, for example, looking at people's feedback on the course, because now you can use open input feedback and feeding it to AI to analyze, okay, so what people liked, what people didn't like, what was clear, what wasn't clear. But these are very discrete use cases used by a minority of learning designers.
I have your diagram. If it's not too late, I wanted to jump in early, but I didn't want to interrupt you. But I could show it now if you like.
Which diagram is it?
That's the 4 stages
Yeah.
of LXD. Just here, I'll just share it right now.
I'd like to ask you, I don't know if you have an answer, but you talk about how much people use it, but do you know anything about the quality of the products, or is it helpful for what you use it for?
I think we're at a stage where people are experimenting with it, and they're not doing any kind of measurement that I could say that, okay, so these are the best practices. This is when I'm talking about this, I don't use the word best practice. I say it's a common practice, because we don't know how that works. In my opinion, I think quiz questions are really quite poor if they're generated by AI. Content sounds very generic and pretty much needs rewriting from what I have seen, but that doesn't, because there's such an impetus for people to almost, it's a case of people using AI to scale what they have always done, instead of taking a step back and rethinking, do I need to keep doing this now that AI is an option? So example, say feedback giving course, right? Do I need to create 30 pages, 30 slides of content about the best practices for giving feedback, or can I just create a practice bot where people can actually practice using their own voice and get feedback on their responses? So things like that. So yeah, so this is the famous diagram, and as you can see, big uptick over strategy and design, especially huge usage in delivery.
Yeah, it's surprising in a way that there isn't more uptake for follow-up, where you could use I forget what you call it, basically like mining techniques, I think, to like basically look at texts essentially summarize the qualitative feedback.
Yeah, and these are quite basic use cases. So it's about AI use cases. If you know how to use AI roughly, it's really quite easy to copy paste and get some sort of snapshot of feedback. Although there is a huge trust factor as well, I think, because unless you have analyzed any kind of say feedback set yourself, I find it personally quite difficult to trust AI's analysis of what are the key themes. So there's that.
We just have two questions left. How will the process of teaching and assessment change? We've already touched on this, but Keen, if you could lead on that, that'd be great.
Just qualifier, I'm not a teacher, but I'm a very keen observer of teaching and assessment, and we see the byproducts of it. And so I think institutions and the people who make up those institutions, whether it's in business or not, but particularly in the public sphere, like universities, etc., that have a kind of social license to operate, they have a choice, and it's not an easy choice. But I think the more that we fail to adapt to the scale of change that AI implies, the more chips will appear or cracks will appear in our social license to operate. And that can come in the form of our graduates going out into the workplace and not really having done the learning that we kind of have stamped that they do. That's kind of my major concern about that. Fundamentally, learning won't happen. And it goes back to what Shaylee said earlier, like that human thing and keeping minds sharp. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of very blunt minds coming out of university because it's just really easy to avoid doing learning. So universities do have that difficult choice whether to change significantly and change assessment in particular. I don't necessarily think teaching needs to change, which goes back to what Efrat said. You know, the way we learn will fundamentally remain the same. The question is, can we let students pass through uni without learning? Because at the moment they are. And we can't really allow that and keep our social license. So I tend to think that online learning has online assessment. Online learning is fine. Online assessment seems to me to have some challenges because I can't see how you can assure learning. And I'm not working in a purely online space, and I'm sure there's people more knowledgeable about it than me. But from someone like me who's relatively kind of observant, I can't see how you can assure learning for students who don't wish to learn. And we need to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge the fact that some students are not interested in learning. They may learn something as a byproduct of just exposure, but I think they're kind of things that we need to worry about. So I tend to think along the lines of programmatic assessment, and there will, Leonard mentioned it before, surveillance, and there's the whole kind of discourse around carceral pedagogy and surveillance. And personally, I kind of go, how could you possibly run online assessment, not have some form of surveillance? Surveillance equals literally close observation. And when you can't have any close observation in an age of AI, you have a problem. So I'll pause there and let other people jump in because I'm sure there's lots of views.
Yeah, Audrey Waters, I think, famously referred to any kind of surveillance in education as cop shit. Actually, sorry, I have a comment and a question. You mentioned programmatic assessment. Could you
Mm.
just kind of spell it out for us? Like what is valid in assessment? What's reliable in assessment now?
So I'll give you an example, like a number of medical schools in Australia, I can't comment upon UK or Europe, but use this model to assure learning. And I'll give you a type of assessment that is, to my mind, nigh on uncheatable. And it's a kind of clinical roundtable, and a student comes in and there's actors pretending to be patients, and they've been given a list of symptoms, and a student has to come in and diagnose them as if they're in an emergency ward. And they're observed by 2 or 3 doctors. Those kinds of things are very, very challenging and very difficult to cheat. Of course, you might have someone in your ear with an earpiece, and like there's lots of tech out there that can kind of feasibly do this thing, but it'd be difficult to be able to react quick enough. I tend to think that someone could pick it up if they were observant themselves of the student. I think things like engagement with an LMS where it might be expected, or lack of engagement. Like a lot of our works come out of just observing LMS logs, or VLE logs as it's known over there. We don't actually surveil anyone. We just download the logs that were there and we enrich them. That's it. I'm not generally a fan of exams because I think it doesn't necessarily give a sizable number of students the platform to demonstrate their learning in a way that necessarily suits them. So it's probably not good for neurodivergent people, etc., etc. But yeah, this is where I kind of get stuck with online learning. I'm not sure how you can get close enough to the subject to observe their learning. It's easier in a kind of traditional university setting. Unfortunately, the go-to is just throw them all into exams and lift up the percentage of the subject. But programmatic assessment is more longitudinal and it looks across the whole of a program, and you'll have key junctures at which, if you don't pass that, you cannot pass. Where at the moment, a student can fail lots and lots of isolated assessments and still pass through the degree without key learning because they picked up enough marks. I hope that answers, Lennon.
So what you're also suggesting, sorry to
No, go.
be daft, but you're suggesting fewer assessments as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we spend a vast amount of money assessing people, and when that assessment has limited validity, i.e. it's not necessarily the student who we're assessing, could be an AI, could be another person, it could be anything but the student. It obviously calls into question the intelligence of spending that money. Assessment has become, in my observer's view, the raison d'etre for a lot of students at university. They go to university and they do assessments, and if learning happens, that might be a happy byproduct. But I think they're so intensely focused on assessment that it seems to suck a lot of the joy out of learning too, because they're just constantly focused on the next task rather than the next thing that they might enjoy learning.
Does anyone have anything to add to that about how teaching and assessment may change in the future?
I try to build up on what Kane was saying. I think that with increasing uncertainty in the world because of geopolitical tensions, the economic downturn, the changing landscape in higher education, the funding constraints we have, so the educators will find themselves very time constrained. And they may resort to using AI tools for content generation and online learning, even if they don't want to. And I fear that over a period of time, they may lose their individuality, their own sense of judgment, and their own perspectives that they normally bring to teaching. And I think building on the point that Kane was saying about assessment, I think there are challenges in ensuring academic and research integrity. Are we assessing students on their own work? How do we know that they are demonstrating their own understanding in any piece of work now that we are assessing? And in the context of online assessment, if we go for online interactive oral assessment, which can be quite effective if you're doing online oral assessments. But then if deep fakes are there in online situations, are we speaking to an avatar of our student, or are we speaking to the real student? And for authentic assessment, which is again a kind of a possible solution for ensuring assessment security, particularly in subjects that require fieldwork or collaboration, that might be hard for online students, because some of these alternative assessment strategies, we may think that they are inclusive, but they're not as inclusive as we would like them to be, particularly for online students who may have opted for online study for a particular reason, like a disability. They only can study on their own, and they might find hard to do these collaborative activities. And I think my final point for this particular question is that the current GenAI applications that we are interacting with and which are available in the public domain, they have scraped every bit of the information that was available on the web. So there are the concepts of copyrights, intellectual property rights, the whole concept of plagiarism has become fuzzy with this advent of GenAI. So as a society, I worry that are we just going to scrape the content from anywhere for our learning, teaching, and assessment without worrying about the consequences? Because the tools that we are using have been scraped. So are we also going to do the same? So how will these concepts of plagiarism and academic misconduct change and evolve? Will these concepts have any meaning in the future? So these are my concerns.
Just to add to that, Tim Neumann, hi Tim, has the comment / question about affordability of assessment. Is having an uncheatable assessment something that universities can afford to do? Do they? You're shaking your head, Kane.
I don't think they can afford to do it, even if it could be done, which is also pretty debatable. I think that, like, it's that kind of Swiss cheese model where, you know, Swiss cheese has holes in it. You cut slices and the holes are in different places. So if a student gets through one hole, they don't get through the next. Or they get through two and get hit by the third, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's about having a secure system and not a foolproof assessment. So there are no silver bullets, and we have to start thinking strategically and holistically about what a program looks like, what is worth teaching and worth assessing. Like, do we teach and assess too far down blooms? I'll let the teachers kind of think about that. I tend to think we do, like, even just using AI to improve language, like, is Grammarly misconduct? I don't think it is, but I'm sure a lot of people would stick it into Turnitin's detector and, you know, go, oh, it came back. And I go, well, we're supposed to be assessing ideas, and we've been judging students on the quality of their writing for a very long time and awarding high marks to those who could apparently write really well, regardless if it was them or not. And we punish those who couldn't write well. So thinking about those things all together, and then having a product, whatever, like, you know, and the product is change.
Can I just...
Sorry, Ness.
So no,
Yeah.
I interrupted you. Sorry. I think I concur with so much of what's been said, but I would add that the danger when we're talking about the greater opportunity that these tools provide for students to cheat is that we homogenize students. And there are plenty of students out there who are very worried about being flagged as cheating and they're not motivated to cheat. So I think absolutely we need, as a kind of a government-led kind of system of education, however you want to put it. Of course, academic integrity, all these things are very, very important. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that not everyone is going to cheat. We shouldn't be naive, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's not everyone's inclination to cheat. And the danger that when we talk about the worries is that we suddenly think, everyone's out to cheat. So I think we just need to have that balance as well, but equally not being naive either about it.
I completely agree. And myself and a colleague wrote a paper on just that topic.
Okay, we've got just
I thought Ephraim
7
was just going to
minutes
say
left.
something.
Oh, sorry.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go on.
Please.
Because thank you, Kane. So I think that I see a connection between what you're talking about here and what I meant before as good pedagogy. Because, for example, if we can design tasks that are complex, if you try, for example, do something that you are professional at, and you'll find out that it's not that easy to create a really good response with AI. So it means that students would not be able to do that. So by good pedagogy, I mean, let's try to see what are the good outcomes and then design back from that, or go backwards and then design those scaffolds. And we can do, for example, ask for something that is not that easy to do, that someone without the knowledge and the skills would not be able to do even with AI, right? And then if I have tasks of this kind, and people are, I think the creativity is expressed in those places, or creativity that I enjoy at least, that we design some complex tasks and then we scaffold towards them. And this is, I think, in very brief, what I mean by good pedagogy. And we had to do it before too, but we could kind of get away with just asking students to summarize because they had to read in order to summarize. And now we understand that it's not a legit task anymore, assignment anymore. So this is where I see those connections by designing tasks that are difficult, that are requiring a lot of skill and knowledge, and then scaffold towards them. And in a sense, this is what I meant by solid pedagogy that we have to do and we didn't do before. Or we did, but not enough.
Just a quick mention of a good comment from Sarah Santos, who says the kind of whatever elephant in the room question says, I think AI in isolation is not the big issue. We've been on the path of eroding education by market pressures to train more workers for creating wealth for a small number of people. Yeah, I think most of us would agree to that, but not much to discuss there, but absolutely. Last question, if we've got we got 4 minutes left, maybe 2 minutes to answer the question. No pressure, Neil, but if you could give a few words to it, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, so I think the question was, to what extent are learning designers' jobs at risk? I would say that because we're not in a very mature phase, I don't think learning designers are going to be replaced. I think we're more at a phase where learning designers are using these tools to assist them in their work rather than it being a case of being replaced. I think there's a lot that falls under the banner of learning designer and lots of different motivations for why people recruit to those roles. So even if there is a risk in the future, I think that might be dependent on certain areas. And I suspect that risk would be more kind of greater felt in a commercial kind of setting where there is the sense that margins may be improved by virtue of losing those pesky costly human workers. So yeah, I think there isn't a huge risk right now. I think one thing I'd just add is, you started the session, Leonard, talking about this sense that we're on kind of shifting sands and we don't know what's kind of going on. And I think my advice to anyone in learning design is the one area of permanence is what Ephrat talked about, is how we learn. And so if you want to be successful in learning design, yes, you should engage with AI, but you should also know about human learning, about how we learn, about all of those things. And if you build up that kind of knowledge, that's gives a permanence. Whatever's going on around you, if you know that, that will help you navigate. I think that's my view anyway.
Here. Yeah. Well, we've got 2 minutes left. If anybody has any final thoughts, I'd be happy for you to share them. I've just put in the link below an event that's actually happening tomorrow, which is a debate about online versus in-person learning. It's going to be at the Senate House, beautiful Senate House in London. I think there'll be drinks afterwards. I don't know if basically the fact of those two kind of slightly biases the argument, but towards face-to-face. But if you're in London, I think it'll be worth going to. I guess if no one has any more to add, I would just like to, or any final comments from our quite exemplary set of participants. Tim Neumann says, lastly, Tim Neumann from the Institute of Education, on cognitive decline, while not similar, there are interesting studies about the effects of calculators on mental arithmetic skills. It's not black and white, but quite nuanced, and AI might be heading the same way, e.g. loss of some skills, but deeper understanding of others, i.e. AI as cognitive enhancer. Yeah, I read a book on memory recently where it showed that basically it was a study about how people had where, in a kind of a googly sort of context where people just had to look things up, people's memory tended to be stronger in knowing key terms, to basically where to look things up, even though that whole argument is very problematic. Like, oh, people can just Google it. I don't think anybody's falling for that here. Shelley, Efrat, Neil, Egla, Kane, thank you so much. And to the participants, thank you so much for your quality comments and contributions. This has been a real pleasure doing this. Thank you. And thank you again to the participants for being great participants.
Thanks, buddy.
And thank you, Kane, for staying up late to chat with us in Australia. So.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.